So Baruch Fleischman, Tikkun Elevator Kollel, Learning Jewish Astrology and Cosmic Science by Reb Yaakov Kronenberg. He's been talking about the fifth house, the eighth house, how the eighth house, which is the house of death, fulfills itself in the fifth house, which is the house of children. Went through a whole lot of moral design over here to give us some ideas. So now he says, let's look at some other numbers. So he says we basically did the numbers 10 and 8, right? He threw in 5 also, but 10 and 8. So let's start with the number 12 and the number 7. Now, originally, let's just go over it again. The number 10 fulfills itself, I guess number 1 fills itself in the 10th house. Number 8, that is the 8th house of Scorpio, fulfills itself in the 5th house. That's what he said. So let's start now. Let's try 2 other ones. The number 12 and number 7, because they have something in common, which is they both talk about enemies. The 2 houses are the enemy houses of the horoscope. So let's look at number 7 in the chart of the first man. Number 7, he says, is Libra. Right? And Libra also is, why is Libra? Because Libra is opposite, it means the opposite house. So if you were a Taurus, for example, your opposite house would be Scorpio. If you were Gemini, your opposite house would be Sagittarius. If you were Cancer, your opposite house would be Capricorn. And Leo, the opposite house would be Aquarius, etc., etc., etc. That's a concept of 7 houses away. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So Libra is the opposite of Aries. As a result, it's a natural enemy, natural a problem for Aries. The same way it goes the other way too. 7 to 1, 1 to 7. So this is another one though. There's another one which is called the 12th house. That's the house in this chart of Pisces. So he said we're going to work on those. That is the number 12, which is opposite. Well, what is 12? 12 is right next to the beginning. I don't know what he's going to say, so we'll find out in a few minutes. So he says, and the next, of course, Aries is opposite Libra. So these are the natural enemies. So let's see how this goes. So the 7th house knows its open enemies. So that's the thing about the 7th house. It knows the enemies are out there. We can see it. This is like the concept of husband and wife in astrology. Okay, they're opposites. They absolutely do not fit together, except they do. The enemies you see, those are enemies that are visible. Now that's the 7th house. 7th house of enemies, the visible enemies. Then he says the 12th house is about secret enemies. Well, he gave the example of the 12th house as the soul in relationship to the 1st house. So the 12th house, in relationship to the 1st house, is the soul in relationship to the body, and the soul is the body's secret enemy. Now think about this. Your neshama, which is constantly telling you to get closer and closer to Hashem, is thinking that, in between you and that pizza that you want to eat, or whatever it would be. The soul always tries to get the body to give up its pleasures and do its bidding. And the 7th house is the house of the open enemy. He just described what the 7th house is about. What the 12th house is about. And he says if you count what it's right next to, then you see that in relationship to you, 12 houses away, that's you, you're going to find that your neshama is battling with your body. That's number 1. That's number 12 is the neshama battling the body, number 1. And then the 7th house is the house of the open enemy, which sometimes means the wife, and at other times it means the other open enemies, like, say, your business partners, or, I don't know, maybe your sister or brother. Because it is said that the Torah about Adam and Eve, that God created him a helpmate against him. Now, this is the concept of Adam Rishon is Aries, and Chava is Libra, which is Eve. This appears to be contradictory. So the Talmud asks, is the wife a helpmate, or is she against us? How can you have a help and be against the man? So the answer is that sometimes she's a helpmate, which at other times she is against him. If he does good, she is a helpmate. But if he does wrong, then she is against him. She is always there, like an open enemy. to always bring him back and correct him so he doesn't go off too much in the wrong direction. So she brings balance to him. He doesn't want to be balanced. And I guess it works conversely too. If the wife starts going off too much in the wrong way, that she's just too strict, too particular, too much gevurdik, then she has her husband to contend with it because she's not going to get him to do what she wants. So in a way, they're open enemies. So let us start by going counterclockwise, that is, forward. Now remember that in the Western world, clockwise is forward, but I'm going to stop saying this just as a disclaimer. So he says, what should I do? Let me start at the first house. So the secret enemy is the first house. You count 12 houses going counterclockwise. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It brings you to this house. Now Pisces, let's just say, for example, what I know about Pisces is an extremely mystical sign. So it's always between this world and the next world. That's Pisces. The Pisces in relationship to Aries. Aries is gung-ho, going forward, smashing down walls. So here you have this Pisces, which wants to be spiritual and mystical, and you have Aries, who's a combatant. So let's see how this works. So he says that's how you count. So for the secret enemy of the first house, you count 12 houses going counterclockwise. That's forward. That gets you to the 12th house, that of the soul. And in a more spiritual way, you want to count clockwise, going clockwise. Let's try this. Let's try this. Let's see what he says, which I got this right. It says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. You come to Taurus, which is the second house. So he said going clockwise, backwards, it gets you to the second house. It's the house of money, which causes him to go after money too much, because you have that relationship is what money makes the world go. From the song from Cabaret, what was that song? That show, Cabernet, something like that. So it's the house of money, which causes him to go after the money too much. And in the end, money doesn't make anybody really, truly happy. Money is good, and it's nice to have money, but if everything else, that is, if you have everything else. And it's like somebody told me that money makes problems seem smaller, because if you have money, you can deal with your problems in more effective ways. That is why when there are bad times, like now, when people lose their money, they really start going crazy. And in the 1920s, people jumped off buildings after losing their money, not so much due to losing their money, but more because suddenly all of their problems had become magnified. When they had a lot of money, money has this effect. It has an ability to be able to calm down the emotions. Their problems seemed little because their money sort of covered up for them. But their problems seemed to be to them as something impossible to solve once they lost their money. And that is what made them so off the edge. So that is why sometimes the secret enemy of the person, that is the first house is you, is the money. That's second. So now he says for this, let's just go along a little bit more here. He says, for the open enemy of the person with an Aries ascendant, you count 7 houses forward, that's counterclockwise, and it comes to the sign of Libra. Now, we counted this out before. I'll show you one more time. It says Aries 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and their opposite, absolutely opposite of Aries is Libra. So he says, and he says like this. He says, the Aries by nature is mostly concerned about himself because he's gung-ho. Cardinal sign. The Libra person, in contrast to the Aries person, is interested in social harmony, wanting the Aries person to kind of calm down a little bit, to care more about anybody else other than himself, and to have a well-functioning society. In other words, Libra is a concept of balance, it's Rosh Hashanah. It's a concept of coming into the balance scale. Whereas Aries is just charging straight ahead, and not everybody just caring about themselves. That's Libra. So the Aries has to see what there is, that there is somebody else besides himself, according to the Libra, and stop behaving like a spoiled child going after what he wants. So he says the number 12 with the secret enemy so far. So the number 12 deals with the secret enemy. So far, the first house is 12 houses away from the first house, going counterclockwise. It gets you to the 12th house, where the soul has to fight on a spiritual level with the body, because the body wants physical pleasure. Now, we're going to stop here. I think this is a good place to stop, because he's going to go house by house. Very interesting teaching. This is Baruch Fleischman, Tikkun Elevator Kolo, and I think this is the third shir in this series.